Welcome to my session. I'll just click over. My name is Lee Ford. Today I'm going to be talking about managing and reporting on teams with Graph API. Now, I think there's already been 2 Graph API sessions today, so I do apologize if I'm going to go over stuff that's already been explained. Obviously, it's kind of I can't assume that everyone has seen those sessions, so I have to cover all bases. So hopefully you do pick up something new along with the session. So if I get started, who am I? My name is Lee Ford. I'm a solution architect at Simity. We work predominantly with Microsoft Teams, Graph for Business, and mainly in the communications side, so telephony and that sort of meeting spaces. I'm based in Birmingham in the UK, and you can find me on Twitter, at my blog, and scripts and tools at GitHub. So yeah, if you need to get in touch, I'm reachable. So what is Graph API? For people that might not know what Graph API is, it is a RESTful API that Microsoft have released, and it encompasses the whole of Microsoft 365, Azure AD, EMS, lots of different bits. But ultimately, what it allows you to do is to tap into all those different types of services like Exchange, OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, etc., and allow you to manage them from a single API. So if you create an application or a tool, then you can tap into all those services with the same authentication. You don't have to have an API for OneDrive and an API for Teams and an API for Exchange. It's all under one API. So it just makes it a bit easier to manage. And likewise, the scheme and everything kind of is the same for everything. So getting started with Graph API, I'll say up front, this session isn't intended on a step-by-step on how to use Graph API for the first time, but more how to use Graph API with Microsoft Teams. However, obviously, I will. So the core concept of using Graph API, I'll just quickly explain, which is that to use Graph API, you need to have an Azure AD 2.0 application. You create that, and that can be created as a what they call it, a single tenant. So you create it for your tenant's data only, or you can create it as a multiple tenant, and then other tenants can use your application that you've created for their own purposes. But it doesn't mean that the person that creates the multi-tenant application has access to everyone else's data. It doesn't work like that. But it's just a way of creating the application. Once you've created the Azure AD application, you assign Graph API permissions to the application. You can also assign other types of permissions to the application. Obviously, in this scenario, we're talking about Graph API. So that would be being able to read someone's emails, or be able to manage a group or a team, maybe manage some files, a OneNote notebook. Those are different types of permissions, and you have read permissions, write permissions, be able to read your own, but not be able to read everyone's, and vice versa. So there's lots of different ways of divvying up the permissions. Once you have the permissions, you authenticate with Azure AD using the application that you've created to obtain an OAuth token. The OAuth token effectively allows you then to request, do Graph API requests with the token. So that means you'd have to authenticate every single request you send to Graph. As long as you have the token and it's valid, then you can send multiple requests whilst the token is still valid, which is 1 hour. So after that, you have to renew the token. So once you've sent a request to Graph API, you'll receive a response from Graph API, and that might be an error, that might be some data. It depends what you're requesting, and obviously the nature of the response. Just a quick one. You've got 2 types of permissions. You've got application-based, which is there isn't a user sign-in portion of that. Effectively, you're creating an application with a secret, and as long as you have that secret, you can then authenticate. So if you're thinking things like scripts or flow or something where there's no user sign-in process, you'd want to use an application-based permission. And if it's user-based, it's a user-facing application or tool, you would use user sign-in, and that way you've got some accountability. You know who's signed in and who's done the Graph API calls. Whereas obviously with an application, there's no way of knowing who's actually run that application. And there is differences depending on what type of data you're trying to get with Graph API. So, for example, if you're trying to get files from a team, it will work a little bit differently depending on whether you're application or user-based. Okay. Today, I'm really going to concentrate on a user authentication. So that means that a user would get prompted to sign in, they will sign in, and then they will be using Graph APIs themselves. Okay, so the very high-level steps to do this is, step one is the user would go to get redirected to login.microsoftonline.com and prompted to sign in. So they would sign in with their username and password. If they have MFA, they would get prompted to do the MFA authentication, and at that point, the a code is what they call an OAuth code is released, and then the script itself would use the OAuth code to get a token. Okay, so at that point, we're at step 4. The OAuth token is issued back to the application, and then, like I said on the previous slide, with that OAuth token, then you can send requests to Graph and get replies or responses from Graph. Application authentication does differ slightly from this. There is no user portion really, so it is ultimately just authenticating with Azure AD, getting an OAuth token, and then sending that onto Graph. So it's a little bit different. Okay. So using Graph API with Teams, with an Azure AD application and the OAuth token, you can make requests to Graph API. These are in form of HTTP requests. This is not all of them. This is just some of them. You know, we could have 10 slides of Graph API requests for Teams, probably even more. But this just gives you a flavor of what type of things you can do with Graph API within a team. So, you know, creating a team, deleting a team, archiving a team, uploading a file, cloning a team, adding a channel. Yeah, there's many more than this, but it's just giving you a feel for it. The one thing you will notice is after the Microsoft.com, there's a v1.0 or a beta. That depends on what version of endpoint you're using. So if you're using beta, typically there's more, you can do more things with beta, but they are untested. They are still in beta. So, you know, you may come into bugs or quirks with the way it works. And indeed, when I was running through the session earlier on, I was creating a team which is currently a beta, and sometimes it was creating it instantly, and other times there was a bit of a delay, which isn't great when you're doing a demonstration. But obviously, bear in mind when you are using beta, they are beta for a reason. So if something isn't working as you'd intend, there may be something wrong with it, and you know, bear that in mind when you're running beta endpoints, and obviously. Has to be said, obviously beta is not production, so you know, if you're looking to write a tool for production, obviously try and not use beta APIs. So this is a sample request that would be sent to Graph API. So a HTTP request. So the method is post, and there's also different HTTP methods. There's post, get, delete, patch, many others. But in this scenario, if you're doing a post, which means we're posting something to it, we're tasking it to effectively create something. And along with that request, obviously we need the URI. So in this case, we're sending a request to /beta/teams. So we're basically saying create a team. The permissions that we require for that request are group.readwrite.all, which, going back a couple of slides, I was talking about assigning permissions to the application. These are the permissions that you would need to assign the application. If you go to the links at the bottom, that kind of gives you an example request similar to this, and it would also outline the permissions depending on whether you're using user or application-based permissions. So that's the permissions bit covered. And then every request needs a header. and typically there's two headers. You don't really see much more than that. You have the bearer token, which is the OAuth token. So you include the OAuth token in the bearer. So it says bearer space, and then you have the token, and the content type. So in this scenario, it's a application /JSON. So I'm sending a JSON payload or content along with the request, and below is the actual JSON request. So this is a very, very, very basic Teams creation request. I think Alexander and Vesku earlier on, when they were doing requests, they were a lot longer and a lot more complex, but I wanted to fit it on one slide. Okay. So that is effectively creating a team. This is a sample Graph API request. And now you've seen this sample Graph API request. I'll, at this stage, I think that's enough PowerPoint, and we'll get on to actually running some of the scripts. So hopefully that's not too small. I might make it a little bit bigger for everyone to see. There we go. And effectively what we need to do first is we need to obtain a OAuth token. There's various different ways of doing that. For user-based authentication, typically there's two ways. You either have the script or the application bring up a prompt to sign in, or what I've tended to do recently is have it present a what we call a device code, and then you go onto the Microsoft website and sign in with that device code, which is what I'm going to do here. So I'll quickly, before I run this, I'll quickly show you some of these parameters. We've got what they call a tenant and a client ID. Those are part of the Azure AD application. And here we have the scope, which is the permissions that I'm looking to request with my OAuth token. So look, I want an OAuth token, and I want these 3 different permissions to be granted as part of the scope. Okay. So if I now bring over my web browser, okay, we have in here an app registration. So this is one that I've already created in advance. Effectively, it has the client and tenant ID, which is in the script. And then I also have the permissions granted, which are the groups, the notes, and the user. Permissions depend on what I'm looking to do with that application. Okay. So if I now go back to the script, if I run this now, select all of that and run it, should get a prompt. So to sign in, use a web browser and open this page and enter the code. So I'm going to copy the code, and then I'm going to go into here and I'm going to enter a code. Okay. And it's going to say you'll be signed into the Oktoberfest, which is the application name that I called the application. And then I choose the account. So I'm going to sign into the admin account for this tenant. And you have signed into Oktoberfest. You may now close this window. Okay. So if I now go back to here in the output, I have a OAuth token. Okay. So the bit I'm concerned about is sort of this jumble of text. That's the OAuth token. Okay. So now if I now go to create team, I can then use this OAuth token within my request. Now, one thing I have done is I have created a function called invoke graph API call, and basically what it does is it means allow me to reproduce this in my other examples. So effectively, what this is me making the request to Graph API, and the reason I've put it in a function is it allows me to do some extra stuff rather than just doing what they call a REST method request. So effectively, I'm specifying the method. I'm using the access token, which I've saved as a global parameter, so I can use it between scripts. And effectively, I am running through and doing a request. Now, one thing I am doing whilst I run the request is I am paging it. So effectively, what I'm doing is I'm looking for more data. So typically, when you send a Graph API request, so for example, if you want to send teams get all the teams from a tenant, I think it's 100 it will return. So if I've got 1,000, then obviously I need to have 10 requests worth of data. And effectively, by looking out for this parameter in the data that's returned, it's basically telling my script there's more data that is left. You need to go back and retrieve it. So in a nutshell, that's effectively what it's doing. It's just a sort of more advanced way of getting running the query than just doing a single request. And like I say, then I can reuse that in other scripts. So I'll minimize that now, and this is the actual request. So effectively, this should look similar because this was in the PowerPoint. We have the template of the team. So we're using a standard team template. You can use different ones like education, for example. I think retail might be another one. They are documented on docs, but ultimately here I'm just going to go with a bog standard template. I'm going to give it a name of Oktoberfest, give it a description, and give it a visibility. That's sort of the bare minimum you need to do when you're running it with user permissions. So it just basically just creates a team with that name and description and makes it private. This is in, I'm running this in PowerShell. Obviously, you can run it in other languages. As long as your language supports HTTP requests fully, then in theory you can write this in Python or I don't know, Perl or whatever else you want to write it in. Obviously, being Microsoft, I'm going to run it in PowerShell. So one thing to note, this is what they call a hash table. It's not actually JSON. So I create it as a PowerShell object, and then I convert it into a JSON object. And then I can use the JSON object then in the call to graph. If I just left it and didn't convert it, I would get an error saying that the JSON was invalid. So that's just something to bear in mind. And then effectively what I'm doing here is I'm looking in the response headers from the request, basically say, look, does it contain a team ID? If it does, that means the team has been created successfully. Okay, so I'll quickly run that now. And hopefully we should get something at the bottom that says you have a team ID, team created with ID. Right, okay, so now if I go back to my teams, I should have a new team here that's just been created. So this was one I did previously about 25 minutes ago. And obviously this is a new one that I've just created. And from here, I can now make it a little bit smaller. I can now modify that team. So I've saved the team ID as a variable. So now then I can start to run other tests. So run other scripts. So this one is adding a channel. Again, very basic body, converting it to JSON and then posting it. It's not difficult as long as you get the format right in the body. You know, you adhere to whatever Microsoft Graph API documentation states. Then in theory there should be no issue. So if I run that now, I should have a team channel returned to me, which I do. So basically this is the channel, and in theory I could click that link and it would take me straight to that channel. So if I now look there, I've got a new channel appeared. Okay, and away we go. Now, one thing I need to check is if it was playing up earlier on and it wasn't sometimes provisioning the files immediately. So let's just see if it's actually going to behave or whether it's going to play up. And no, it's going to play up, isn't it? Okay, let's just refresh the. I previously created one and it did create the wiki and everything for me, but for some reason when I sometimes run the request, it wasn't. So what I might do is rerun the create and just see if we can get that to actually create in a timely manner. It will sort itself out, but obviously in the interest of everyone's time, we don't want to wait for that. So let's just run another team and see if that makes any difference. Let's have a look. Is it going to work? Oh, yeah, this one's worked. Okay, not sure why, but this one's working. The other one didn't. Exactly the same request. So it's beta. So let's just go with that. So if I delete the other team just to avoid confusion. So now I've created a team, and then I can then go and recreate the channel again. Okay, so now if I go back to here, I should have a channel, which I do. Okay, now what I can do is I can upload a file to a team. And the way you do this is you have to request a what they call an upload session. So for every file, you need to create an upload session, and then that upload session, you upload the file in that session until it's complete. So if you have 100 files, you need to create 100 upload sessions and upload each file. You have to upload the file in chunks if it's over 60 megabytes. I tend to chunk it anyway down to about 8 megabytes. It just seems to work a bit better that way. And then it will upload the file in 8 megabyte chunks until it's complete. I won't go through all of this, but ultimately that's what this is going through. So if we look, what I'm doing here is I'm taking a file from my computer and then I'm uploading it into the general channel as a same file name. Obviously, you can modify the file name, you can modify the destination depending on what you need. So effectively, if I run this now, fingers crossed, it should upload a file. There we go. So it's uploaded the file and we've got success. So now if I go into my general channel and go into files, I have that file that's just been uploaded. Okay. And at the same time, I can also download files. So in this scenario, I'm going to download everything to a C temp Oktoberfest. And I'll just make sure that's not got anything in. So what should happen now is that should download all the files within that team and maintain the file structure. So if you have 10 different channels, it will create 10 different folders, one for each channel, and maintain the file structure of the team. So it's great if you want to have a snapshot of a team and go, okay, yeah, this is how the files were at this time. And it's a great way of doing it. So effectively what I'm doing here is I'm listing all of the items in the drive. So the drive is effectively the SharePoint document storage stroke OneDrive. It's what attaches to the team, and all the files within the team sit within that drive. So effectively I'm listing all the files or items within that drive and then going through each item and downloading it. So each item has what they call a download URL, which is like it's a time based, so it'll only be valid for an hour, I think. Download URL, so you can download the file using a standard web request and then output it to a file. Okay, so if I run that now, it should find that file. Yes, it does. And obviously, if you've got 100 files, it would go through and it would download each one individually. So now if I go back to my file, I then have a files section, and then this is effectively the drive as such. So in here I have general, and then I have the file. So if that was down, let's say if we were to put it inside a folder, so if I delete that, and put it in a folder, let's have a look. Find my team again. We create a new folder, call it new, and then in there we put a file, put a Word document in there. Okay, it's a blank document, but that's fine. If I rerun that, it should go through and download that file. Yeah, it does. Okay, so now if I go back to here and look in general, I have the file structure is maintained. I have new and I have the Word document under there, same as it was in the team. Okay, so that's kind of very basic Teams management. Recommend you check out Vescus and Alexander for probably more advanced, that they really went into the fast-paced detail of really going through creating channels and tabs and SharePoint lists, and yeah, there's about 1,000,001 things. I don't want to sort of replicate what they've already done, so I've tried to show you how it's done, but obviously not just copying really. So final thing is, how do you delete a team? So effectively, it's a very simple request. We send a request to the group, because groups and teams are the kind of team is part of a group. So we effectively delete the group, and the method going, rather than being a get or a post or a patch, it's a delete. If I run that, then it will delete the team. One thing to note is that the team, if you delete it in here, it will delete almost, it deletes from the client immediately. If you delete it via Graph API, it can take a little while for that. It will sit there for a little bit. However, the deleted groups, that's test ones that we've been deleted or on that failed, it will appear in here immediately. So that was the one that failed, and then this is the one that I've just deleted like 30 seconds ago. So it at least gives you a feel for, that it has deleted, but it can sit on here for a little bit. Okay, so that's kind of the teams management side, and then from a reporting point of view, there's lots of different things you can report on depending on your scenarios. So I've just taken a few here that I've been asked in the past, that people said, oh, can you tell me this, or can you tell me that? And this is a common one, which is, can you tell me what tabs are people are using? What's the most common type of tab? Is it web pages, or is it OneNote, or is it wikis, or whatever is it? And this effectively will do that. So if I run this now, it'll go through and it'll check each team, and check the tabs within each channel, and then it will give us an output at the end to say, yes, this these tabs have been used within this this tenant, and it obviously lists them. The only issue that you'll see in a minute is a couple of them don't really have proper names. I think OneNote is a GUID, so it's hard to know exactly what it is. You could obviously add the logic into the script, but you'll see in a second when it outputs that you do have some apps or tabs that don't have a proper naming convention, so it's difficult to know exactly what they are. We'll just go through these. I'm suspecting wiki will probably be the highest, because that gets added as yes. So that gets added kind of as part of a team creation, and channel creation. So we can see here wiki's the most popular one, then Excel, then Planner, then PowerPoint. I believe that's OneNote, then Word, then Web, and I'm not sure what that one is. And obviously Power BI bringing up the rear. So that's just a very quick way of reporting on, usage of Teams, how people are using Teams. Are people really using Power BI the way you want them to be doing? Are people pinning a lot of web? There's different ways you could use that to report on. Another one is, what are my users using for web when they're pinning web pages? Actually, there's no sort of restriction on that, so ultimately anyone can pin what they want to a web page. Doesn't mean it will work, but it's just interesting to know what people are pinning. So maybe you might have it where maybe people their browser's locked down, that they can't access websites that they're not meant to access, but it works through a Teams tab, and people's kind of circumventing the security measures put in place. Another one might be people are just curious, what sort of websites are people pinning to their tabs? Maybe there's an app that they could be using rather than pinning the website. So for example, someone might be pinning a Power BI dashboard rather than using the Power BI app within Teams. Something like that may be an example where actually maybe we can educate these users. Okay, yeah, you don't need to pin that. You'd get a better experience if you use the native Teams app. So yeah, that's just a couple of scenarios they may have. So we run through this one now. This should give us a list similar to the other one, where it just lists out all the web tabs within Teams. Yeah, it's quite a few. This is a demonstration tenant, so obviously there's a lot of generated teams, so we just have to wait for it to work through all of these. Okay, so at the end, I don't know why there's a big gap there. I think my console window's gone a bit weird, but we effectively have 5 web page tabs, and we can see what URL they're tied to. So like I say, if you're trying to clamp down on it being abused, or then here's a way to see. Maybe you could see that the a Teams application is trying to access a web page that's being blocked, and you can see it. Maybe the security team said, look, your Teams applications are trying to access this web page. Can you investigate what team is using it? Then obviously this is one way you could do that, rather than having to go through each team individually and check yourself. So that's another way of reporting. And this one is effectively listing Teams drive usage. So what this is useful for is if you have a list of Teams, you just want to see how much people are using it for storage. Maybe Teams should be putting all their documents in Teams as part of centralizing their document storage, but people are leaving it on their desktop and whatnot. And obviously by listing the teams and their usage, you can go, well, hang on a minute, this team should have more. They don't have anything that their quota is 0. Where are they putting their documents? Or you might just want to see, just for curiosity, who's using the most space. And effectively, what this does is it checks through each team, checks through their drive, and then lists the usage of that drive. So another way is obviously if you're thinking that some sites may be approaching their maximum, then you could also adapt this to include percentage used or something like that, and from there calculate the usage. And if some sites are going to be close to the maximum, then also you can look to address that. So here we can see that Mark 8 project team is using 171 megabytes, and whereas some others that we've further on down, obviously they're using much less. So that's it on the reporting. I could send do another 10 reports on different types of usage, like authored teams, or teams with the most chat messages in, or there's lots of different reporting on that. But obviously, we only have 40 minutes, and it's 34 minutes into it now. So the last one I want to do is something I've been working on, which is a backup team script. And the reason to show you this is just kind of a bit of inspiration, really, or show you what you can do. Let's say if you integrate all the different APIs of Graph within Teams and put it into a single script, and how you can potentially create a tool, rather than a lot of these samples are nice as sort of little scripts, but as a proper powerful tool, maybe not so much. And this is something that I've spent a lot of time on, and I think kind of encompasses what you can do with Graph API and certainly PowerShell. So what I'll do is I'm actually going to run it from a console window just because it's going to be a bit easier to see what it's doing. We are in PowerShell core, so it does look a little bit different. It's not blue. So if I run that now, effectively what that will do is it will prompt me for a code like before. So if I go back to here and sign back in, I can then sign in, and notice it didn't say Oktoberfest this time, it said backup team, because obviously that's the application that I've created for this script. And then if I search for a team, I can get a team. So let's pick ACC 1000 product team. So team 0 I want to back up, and that'll go through and it'll create the group settings, team settings, owners, members, channels, tabs, conversations, files, and put it all into a single zip file. Therefore, just wait for that to complete. Hopefully there's not 1,000 files in this team. I've not backed this one up before, so we'll see. Okay, it looks like there's quite a few. So let's just wait for that to finish. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so we don't want to back up another team. So now if I go to my temp folder, which I saved it to, I have a zip file. I can extract that. And within that zip file, we have the files and in the format that we saw earlier. We also have a report that shows the backup status and lists out all the members and the owners of the team. And we can go into the file, look at the files of a particular. Okay, well, that hasn't got any files in of the team. We can also look at the conversations of a team. And this is all powered via Graph API. So we're not relying on any other outside tool. So it's Graph API and PowerShell, basically. So anyone can do this without any modules or having to know anything more advanced than PowerShell. So that's it, creating a team. And now if I go back to, where's my console window gone? If I go back to here, I can then also recreate the team. So if I recreate the team, what was it called? That's the one I created. So if I sign in again, okay, would I like to recreate the team? Yes, I would. And this will go on based on all that information. It basically squirts it back into Graph API. Using Graph API, it squirts everything back into, it creates the teams, the channels, the owners, the members, the files. One thing it doesn't do at the moment is conversations, because there's no Graph API to create conversations other than from the person creating the conversation. So as I'm logged in as admin, if I was to repost those messages, they would be from me rather than the person that actually wrote the message previously. So let's go through this. Whilst we're doing that, we'll just quickly look at the file at the so it's recreated it with me inside, and obviously it's added all the people in. And if I go into files, let's not do this again. There we go. Right, okay. We have the files that, and you can see it's actually uploading them as temporary files until it's actually fully uploaded. And that's essentially it. we don't need to watch all the files upload, but ultimately that's what it's doing there. It's going through and uploading all the files. So that's it in a nutshell, really. I realise that we're running close to the end time. Has anyone got any questions or queries or feedback? I suppose I should just quickly go back to the PowerPoint. Any questions from anyone? No? Okay. So one last thing then is thank you everyone for attending. The presentation, all the code samples that I've used today, I will put on GitHub, and feedback is welcome. If you could fill that survey in and select my session and give me feedback, that would be much appreciated, good or bad. And yeah, thank you for your time.